clear water baked beneath a high Wyoming sun. Outside the saloon, John Monroe leaned against the hitch rail, a bottle in his hand and eyes yellowed by drink. Across the street, a chestnut mare pawed at the dust, her hide gleaming like burnished copper. Nathaniel Garrett, a widowed rancher with 3 young sons, studied her steady stance before lifting his gaze to the man selling more than just an animal. "That mare's worth more than the mouths I'm feedin'," Monroe rasped. "You could use a woman's hand at your place. Take the girl, she's 19, reads, cooks, sews. The horse for her, it's a fair trade." Nathaniel's jaw set. "I'm not buying cattle." John laughed, a sound cracked and cruel. "Call it what you like."
Batba, easy.
Through the window of the general store, Eliza Monroe sat by the light mending a torn shirt, unaware that her worth was being measured in reins and coin. Nathaniel hesitated as the mare snorted and coins clinked. He knew the bargain had been spoken wrong. Monroe was trading his daughter for another man's horse, too drunk to see that no decent man would take that deal straight. Nathaniel's conscience hardened. He realized that if he walked away, the girl would still be sold, only to someone far worse. When Monroe stumbled back into the saloon to boast of the trade, Nathaniel crossed the street. The chestnut mare remained tied where she'd been from the start, her reins looped to his wagon post. The drunk hadn't even noticed he'd never actually taken her. Inside the store, boots scraped against the floorboards. John's shadow filled the doorway. "Pack your things," he barked at Eliza. "You sold me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That horse will plow," he countered. "You only eat." She gathered her 2 books, her mother's locket, and what few clothes still fit, folding them into a worn canvas bag that had once been her mother's sewing satchel. With that, she packed her dignity. Nathaniel waited outside, hat in hand. "Miss Monroe, I'm Nathaniel Garrett." She met his eyes, her gaze guarded. "I understand, Mr. Garrett." He tipped his head, the gesture more of a vow than a greeting. "You're not bought, ma'am, not by me." The wind rose, lifting dust between them. Coins lay forgotten somewhere in the dirt as the mare stamped steadily between the traces. Somewhere inside that swirling silence, a single question began to form. What Nathaniel did next would silence the town for months to come. By noon, the wagon rolled north out of Clearwater. The saloon faded behind them, its swinging doors whispering shut like the end of a bad chapter. Eliza sat stiff-backed beside Nathaniel, hands folded in her lap, watching the road unspool through waves of heat. The chestnut mare trotted steadily behind, her only familiar thing in a world that had just traded her name for reins. Nathaniel glanced at her once before fixing his eyes on the horizon. "You can ride if you'd rather," he said quietly. "She's yours now." "She's yours," Eliza replied, her voice thin but steady. "Like me." He frowned at that. "Nobody owns anybody, Miss Monroe. Not out here." They rode on in silence, the wagon creaking and the harness leather squeaking as the wind carried the dry sweetness of sagebrush. Now and then he passed her the canteen wordlessly. She drank carefully, avoiding the brush of his hand. By evening, they reached a dry creek bed and stopped to make camp. Nathaniel gathered wood while she spread a blanket near the wagon. He offered jerky and biscuits from his pack, and she accepted with a small nod, the first fragile civility between them. When darkness fell and coyotes began their lonely song beyond the hills, Nathaniel sat by the fire. The light carved quiet lines into his face. He was a man who had seen too much loss and had learned to bury the ache under work and silence. Eliza sat on the blanket, her book open in her lap, the words barely visible in the flicker. When the flames settled to coals, she climbed into the wagon and lay awake, listening to the wind sift through the sage and the soft cough of the mare. Nathaniel didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. But when he lay down on the ground beside the wagon, he faced outward, away from her, keeping watch until dawn. The next day, the Garrett ranch came into view just as the sun tipped west. A modest clapboard house stood above a dry creek, its porch sagging and shutters half askew. The fence had been mended in too many places to count. Beyond it stretched pastures the color of copper dust, dotted with grazing cattle and the shimmer of distant mountains. Eliza studied it in silence. The house wasn't fine, but it was honest. It looked like it had been built by hands that meant to stay. Nathaniel reined the wagon to a stop. It's not much, but it keeps the wind off and the roof don't leak. She nodded. A sound roof's worth more than painted trim. He helped her down. The boards underfoot were solid. The step creaked but held. A child's ball lay in the dust, sun-bleached and forgotten. Through the open doorway drifted the faint scent of stale bread and wood smoke that hadn't burned in days. Inside, the rooms felt too still. 3 small beds lined the wall. In the corner room, a woman's bonnet hung from a peg, its ribbons faded by time. Eliza traced a finger over the dust on the mantel. "You built this yourself?" "With Sarah," he answered. The name hung between them like breath in cold air. She died birthing the youngest. Eliza set her bag by the door. "You want supper made?" "If you're able, boys will be in from chores soon." He showed her the small spare room off the hall, clean, plain, and private. The door shut with a solid click, and the key turned smoothly in her hand. For the first time in years, a lock answered to her, not against her. As dusk deepened, she smoothed the coverlet on the narrow bed and stood for a moment in the quiet room. The scent of soap and cedar steadied her. It wasn't comfort yet, but it was safety, and that was more than she had dared to hope for. Evening settled across the prairie like cooling embers. From the kitchen window, Eliza watched 3 figures cross the yard, dust-covered, sunburned, and loud with the energy only boys carry home from work. Thomas, tall for 12, led the way with a practiced swagger. James, 9, trailed behind swinging a rope in idle circles. William, 6, clutched a crooked wooden stick he called his rifle. When they spotted their father standing beside a stranger, the noise died. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "This is Miss Eliza Monroe. She'll be helping around the house." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "We don't need help." Eliza met his look without flinching. "Good. Then we'll get along fine." James studied her curiously. "Can you read?" "I can," she said. "And if you ask polite, I might teach you more than that." William pressed close to Nathaniel's leg, half hiding. Eliza smiled gently. "I don't bite, only burn biscuits sometimes." That earned a faint grin from James, and even Thomas's mouth twitched before he caught himself. Inside, the kitchen soon smelled of stew and wood smoke. Eliza set bowls on the table while Nathaniel washed up. The boys watched her quietly, measuring the woman who had stepped into their late mother's place. When she served them first, Thomas frowned. "Pa always eats first." "Then Pa's due a rest," Eliza replied. Then pause is due. Tonight, we'll let the young men go first. Nathaniel entered just in time to see Thomas hesitate, then obey. He said nothing, only took his seat and bowed his head as Eliza murmured grace. After supper, when William yawned, she drew a small book from her satchel. One story, she said, glancing toward the table. William climbed close, his eyes heavy, while James leaned forward eagerly. Thomas lingered by the doorway, pretending not to listen. She smiled faintly, opened the book, and began to read. The lamplight pulled gold around them. By the time the last line fell, William had fallen asleep against her sleeve, and James's head rested on his arms, content. Thomas stayed still, his gaze lowered, as though the story had reached further than he meant it to. Nathaniel watched quietly from the door, the crease of his brow unfolding for the first time in years. Weeks passed, marked not by calendars but by chores and small mercies. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window where Eliza kneaded dough, her sleeves rolled high. The smell of yeast and wood smoke drifted through the house, chasing away the long-kept scent of loneliness. The boys learned her rhythms before they learned her history. William brought her eggs each morning, sometimes whole, sometimes broken. James hovered nearby with his primer, reading haltingly while she worked. And Thomas, who had once glared at her, began mending fences beside her without being asked. When William tore his only good shirt on a nail, he came to her in tears. She took the cloth from his shaking hands. I'm not your ma, William, but I can still fix it. The needle flashed in the lamplight, and within minutes the rent was gone. The boy stared, then wrapped his small arms around her waist. For a heartbeat she froze, then returned the hug, careful and certain. Later that week she found James hiding in the barn with a book he couldn't master. I'm stupid, he muttered. Eliza sat beside him on a bale of hay. You're learning. That's what smart people do. They keep going. From that night on, they read together after supper, her voice low and patient, his confidence growing with each line. By the 6th week, even Thomas began to soften. When a ranch hand made a crude remark about the woman Garrett bought, Thomas's fist struck first. Nathaniel heard the commotion and came running, but the hand was already backing down. Eliza knelt by Thomas, wiping blood from his knuckles. Next time words are sharper than fists, she told him. He nodded, shamefaced, but his eyes shone with loyalty. That night, as she finished mending by lantern light, Nathaniel paused in the doorway. You've done something I couldn't. She looked up. What's that? Made this house feel alive again. He didn't linger for an answer, just tipped his hat and left her to the soft hum of crickets and the steady pulse of belonging she was finally starting to feel. Nathaniel had never planned to care for the woman he brought home that March. Need had made him practical, nothing more. Yet every time he passed the kitchen and saw Eliza bent over her work, something inside him eased. He had built this life out of routine and hard labor, but lately he caught himself pausing just to watch her. She would hum while she cooked, soft tunes without words. The house had grown warm again, not from fire but from her steady hands. One evening he found her in the barn tending the chestnut mare, the very horse that had once been her price. The animal had cut its leg on barbed wire. Eliza knelt beside it, whispering, You're worth more than he ever knew. We both are. Nathaniel stopped in the doorway, something tightening in his chest. Lamplight pooled over her hands, gilding her hair and the patient animal's flank. He had seen beauty before, but not like this, quiet, earned, and unself-conscious. When she caught him watching, he only tipped his hat. "You've a way with hurt things." Her smile was faint. "I've had practice." That night, Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table long after the lamp burned low. He thought about her courage and realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he wanted to live rather than simply endure. He closed his ledger and whispered into the stillness, "She could leave tomorrow if she wanted. God help me, I hope she doesn't." Saturday came, bright and windless. Eliza rode beside Nathaniel in the wagon, a basket of eggs at her feet. She wore a freshly pressed calico dress and a blue ribbon in her hair. As they stepped into the general store, conversation dropped to a hush. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, let her words fall like stones. "Well, looks like Garrett finally brought the girl he bought." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. Eliza's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. Nathaniel's voice came low and steady. "Mrs. Henderson, you watch that tongue." "I only speak a word everyone knows," she replied with sweet poison. Nathaniel took a step closer, his boots thudding like punctuation. "My wife manages my home, raises my sons, and keeps this ranch running. She reads Latin, balances accounts better than I ever could, and delivered a breech calf last week that would be dead under lesser hands. You tell me, ma'am, what do you do besides ruin a decent morning?" The store went still as a graveyard. Eliza's heart hammered, but her dignity spoke louder than any defense could. Nathaniel laid coins on the counter, took his sack of sugar, and turned to Eliza. "Ready to go home?" "Home sounds good," she nodded. As they stepped outside, the whispering began again, but it was different. Some people nodded as they passed. A few smiled with respect. Eliza lifted her chin to the sunlight, the warmth on her face feeling like something she had earned. Autumn came early, and Eliza Garrett, for by now she had earned the name in every way but ceremony, had settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before a dawn, brewed coffee, and outworked half the men in the county. But it wasn't just labor that marked her worth. She taught the boys their sums and letters so well that even the schoolteacher commented. When Nathaniel worried over ledgers, she stayed up beside him. "You're paying too much for feed," she noted. "They're adding 10% that isn't yours to lose." "Then we'll stop losing," he smiled. The ranch began to prosper. Debt fell away like old bark. By the time the snow melted, they had saved nearly $40, almost the exact sum her father had once taken for her. Nathaniel didn't mention it, but he wrote the number carefully in the margins of his ledger, marking the turning of something sacred. That spring, when a mare foaled early, Eliza guided the trembling newborn into the world. Nathaniel, watching her, felt his voice grow thick. "You've saved us again." "Just did what was needed," she replied. That night, Nathaniel realized the ranch no longer belonged to him alone. It belonged to all of them. And most of all, to the woman who had turned work into love and hardship into home. Summer returned, soft and golden. One evening, Nathaniel found Eliza on the porch rail. The boys had gone to bed, and the house glowed with lamplight behind her. "I never thanked you," Nathaniel said, "for everything." "You gave me a place to stand," she whispered. "I just learned how to fill it." Nathaniel searched for words. I brought you here for help, but you've become more. Eliza looked at him steadily. I came here as property. You made me feel human again. Sarah would have liked you, he murmured. She was kind, but she was never strong like you. Maybe she didn't have to be, Eliza said softly. Maybe that was your lesson for me. A long silence settled between them, comfortable and certain. Fireflies drifted above the grass. Eliza, I don't know how to do this right. Nathaniel stepped closer. But I know what I want, not as a debt, but as a choice. May I court you properly? Eliza's eyes glimmered. You're asking my permission. It's the only way that matters. Her lips trembled into a smile. Then yes, yes you may. 18 months passed. The Garrett Ranch had weathered 2 winters and come out stronger. Eliza moved through her days as a wife, a mother-to-be, and the heart of the home. On a late summer afternoon, a shadow fell across the yard. A horse stumbled into view, its rider swaying. It was John Monroe. Eliza, he slurred, smelling of whiskey. There's my girl. That girl's worth 10 horses now from what I hear. I figure I'm owed a share. Nathaniel stepped out, his jaw tightening. Eliza moved down toward the yard, her posture steady. You sold me, father, for a horse, and you spent that horse's life on whiskey. You can't talk to me that way, he narrowed his eyes. I'm your blood. No, she said, her tone like iron wrapped in grace. You're my past, that's all. When he tried to push past Nathaniel, Thomas, now grown tall, stepped forward to block him. You best leave, mister. For a second, the drunk man saw what he had thrown away, a family whole and proud without him. Eliza looked at him with neither hate nor pity, only finality. You gave me away like I was worthless. You gave me a life worth living. We're done here. John Monroe turned his horse and disappeared over the ridge. Nathaniel rested a hand on Eliza's shoulder. You all right? Yes, she nodded. For the first time, I truly am. Spring returned to Clearwater, washing the land clean. When the church bells rang, the town saw Nathaniel and Eliza Garrett step down from their wagon. They had been wed 6 months, and the whispers of judgment had long since softened into respect. Mrs. Henderson approached them in the churchyard. Mrs. Garrett, I was wrong about you. Eliza smiled softly. Most of us are, until we learn better. We all deserve second chances, Eliza added, taking the woman's hand. The town elder spoke up. The Garrett Ranch is the finest in 3 counties. That's down to both of you. As the family left, the crowd parted easily. No one whispered anymore. By the wagon, Nathaniel helped Eliza up, meeting her eyes. Reckon the town's changed its mind. No, Eliza shook her head. They just finally saw what was true all along. 5 years later, the Garrett Ranch was a kingdom built on calluses and prayer. A second house was under construction for the growing family. Inside, above the hearth, hung a photograph of the whole family standing proud. And in the barn, on a wooden beam, hung the old saddle of the chestnut mare. Carved into the leather by Nathaniel's hand were the words, "The horse that brought me everything in 1883. Doubt. That evening, Nathaniel set his arm around Eliza's shoulders. You ever think about that day? Sometimes, but not with pain. What he traded away gave us everything. Nathaniel's hand tightened around hers. He thought you were worth a horse, but you were worth all the gold in California. Worth isn't what you're given, Eliza smiled, watching the sun set over their land. It's what you build. In the summer of 1883, a father made a choice that would haunt him forever. He sold his daughter to a rancher for a horse. But what he didn't know was that the lonely widower would treat her like the treasure she truly was. This is the story of Eliza and Nathaniel, brought to you by Dustin Hart Western Tales, a tale of a girl the world called worthless, and the man who proved she was made of gold. The last of summer burned out across the plains, and in the quiet of the house, love, real and earned, had finally found its place.